The diner sat at the edge of a quiet town, the kind of place where everyone seemed to know everyone else. The air always smelled of coffee and baked pies, and there was a comfort in the sound of plates clinking and soft chatter. On that calm afternoon, the sky outside was cloudy, but warm light still streamed in through the windows, landing gently on the checkered floor. A young girl sat alone in a corner booth near the window. She was small, with gentle eyes that carried both shyness and kindness. Her legs were braced with metal supports that helped her walk, and her hands sometimes trembled a little when she lifted her glass. Her name was Lena. She came here often after her therapy sessions because she liked how peaceful it felt inside. The waitress always saved her favorite booth by the window where she could watch people pass by and write in her small notebook. Lena didn't speak much, but when she smiled, people noticed. It wasn't just a smile. It was soft, honest, and full of patience. That day, she ordered a simple plate of fries and a milkshake. The waitress, an older woman named Mary, brought it over and said kindly, "You're early today, sweetheart." Lena smiled and nodded, saying she had finished her exercises ahead of time. Mary patted her shoulder and went back to refill coffee cups for the regulars at the counter. Everything felt normal and calm, at least for a while. The front door opened suddenly, and the bell above it gave a sharp ring. A group of 4 teenagers walked in, talking loudly and laughing in that careless way that turned heads. They weren't regulars. Most of the town didn't recognize them. They looked like the kind who always needed an audience. Loud voices, restless energy, and smirks that didn't hide much kindness. They picked a booth near the center and started joking with each other. It wasn't long before their laughter got louder, echoing through the small diner. The waitress tried to keep things smooth, serving them with patience, though her smile faded a little. The other customers avoided looking their way. Lena stayed quiet, focused on her fries, trying to tune them out. But she could feel their eyes turn toward her now and then. She glanced up once, and one of them, a boy with a baseball cap turned backward, was already watching her. He whispered something to his friends, and they all laughed again. She looked down, pretending not to hear. Minutes passed, but the noise only grew. The boys seemed bored and were looking for trouble. One of them mimicked the way she reached for her drink, making his friends laugh harder. Another started whispering too loudly, saying things about how she walked funny. The words stung like needles. Lena's cheeks flushed, but she didn't say a word. She just tried to keep eating, though her hands started shaking. The waitress noticed and called out, "You boys keep your voices down, or you'll have to leave." One of them laughed and said, "Relax, lady. We're just joking." But everyone could feel it. It wasn't a joke. It was mean, small-hearted cruelty. Lena wanted to disappear. She wished she could just vanish from that booth. Her eyes watered, but she blinked fast, not wanting anyone to see her cry. The other diners looked uncomfortable, glancing between her and the boys but saying nothing. That silence felt heavier than the laughter. When the waitress turned her back for a moment, one of the boys got up and walked toward Lena's booth. He leaned over her table, pretending to look curious. "Hey," he said, his voice full of mock sweetness. "What's wrong? Don't like people talking to you?" His friends at the other booth snickered. Lena didn't answer. She kept her eyes on her plate. She didn't want to make things worse. The boy chuckled and said louder, "What, can't talk either?" Then he knocked lightly on her table, making her jump. The fries scattered a little. The diner went completely silent. Every person froze. Even the soft hum of the coffee machine felt distant now. The waitress turned around, her face pale with anger. But before she could reach him, the boy laughed, muttered something under his breath, and walked back to his friends. They all burst into laughter again. Lena sat there quietly, her hands trembling over the spilled fries. Her eyes stayed fixed on the table. She didn't want anyone's pity, but she couldn't stop the tears that finally fell. The waitress hurried over and kneeled beside her, whispering gently, "It's okay, sweetheart. Don't you worry about them." She cleaned up the table and brought Lena a fresh plate. Though Lena barely touched it, the group of boys finally finished their food, if they even ate much, and left the diner, still laughing loudly as they pushed open the door. The bell above rang again, this time sounding harsh instead of friendly. When the door closed, it felt like the whole place exhaled in relief. For a few long seconds, no one spoke. Then a man sitting at the counter muttered, "Unbelievable." Another said quietly, "Kids these days have no respect." But those words didn't change anything. They were spoken too late. Mary poured Lena a new milkshake free of charge. "On the house, honey," she said softly. Lena tried to smile, wiping her tears with a napkin. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice small but sincere. She didn't want to be a burden. She just wanted the day to go back to how it was before, quiet, safe, ordinary. At the far end of the diner, an older man with a long gray beard had been sitting alone near the window. He hadn't said a word during the whole thing, but his eyes had followed everything. He looked down at his coffee cup, his jaw tight as though he was holding back a storm. After a while, he stood up, put a few bills on the counter, and walked outside. No one paid much attention, but Mary saw him pause near his motorcycle before pulling out his phone. He talked for a short moment, his voice calm but serious. Then he nodded, put his helmet on, and rode away. Back inside, the diner slowly came back to life. The sound of forks against plates returned. Soft music played again from the old jukebox, and conversations picked up, though quieter than before. Still, everyone seemed to glance at Lena now and then, a look filled with both sympathy and guilt. Lena didn't stay much longer. She thanked Mary again, packed her small bag, and carefully stood up using her braces. The walk to the door felt longer than usual. Each step echoed faintly against the tile floor. She didn't look back when she left. She just stepped out into the fading light and disappeared down the sidewalk. After she left, the silence lingered. The waitress sighed, rubbing her hands with a cloth, and said softly, "I should have done more." The man sitting by the counter replied, "We all should have." His voice carried regret. He looked out the window at the road, as if waiting for something or someone. The afternoon drifted into evening. The diner lights glowed warmer, casting soft shadows on the walls. The few people who stayed behind talked in low voices, replaying the scene in their minds. They all knew it had been wrong, and they all knew they'd done nothing. That guilt stayed with them long after their meals were finished. In the corner, the waitress wiped down Lena's booth one last time. She noticed a folded napkin left on the table. On it, in small shaky letters, Lena had written, "Thank you for being kind. I'll be okay." Mary pressed the napkin to her chest for a moment. She whispered, "You didn't deserve that, sweetheart." She tucked the note safely behind the counter. Outside, the sky had turned golden. The road stretched out quiet and empty. In the distance, a faint rumble of engines rolled through the air, the kind of deep, steady sound that made the windows vibrate slightly. The people inside the diner didn't notice it yet. They just kept talking softly, unaware that something unexpected was already on its way. For now, the diner seemed peaceful again, but beneath that peace was a feeling, the kind that stays after a storm. The kind that makes people think about what's right, what's wrong, and how silence can sometimes hurt just as much as cruelty. Lena walked home slowly that evening, the sky dimming above her. The streetlights flickered on one by one. She kept her head down, trying not to replay what had happened, but she couldn't help hearing those laughs echoing in her mind. She wished someone had said something. Anyone. Still, somewhere deep inside her, she held on to a tiny spark of hope. Maybe not everyone in the world was like those boys. Maybe somewhere out there kindness still existed. She didn't know it yet. But the kindness she hoped for was already moving toward her, in the form of roaring engines, leather jackets, and a group of people who didn't just talk about doing what's right. They actually did it. The evening settled softly over the small town as the last streaks of sunlight disappeared behind the hills. Inside the diner, the mood still felt heavy, even though the laughter and noise from earlier had long faded. The waitress, Mary, stood behind the counter, wiping the same spot over and over without realizing it. The memory of what had happened an hour ago lingered in everyone's mind like a bad dream they couldn't quite shake off. The people who had been there when it happened were still talking quietly about it. A man in his 50s sitting near the window said, "That girl comes in here all the time, doesn't she?" Mary nodded slowly. "Every Thursday after her therapy session. She's a sweet kid. Never causes trouble." The man sighed. "Those boys ought to be ashamed of themselves." "They will be," said another customer half under his breath. But deep down, everyone in that diner felt the same uncomfortable truth. None of them had stepped forward when it mattered. They all wanted to think they were good people, but in that moment fear had kept them silent. The guilt of that silence now filled the air thicker than the smell of coffee. Mary finally put down the cloth and poured herself a small cup. She stared into it for a while, then glanced at the napkin tucked behind the register, the one Lena had written on before she left. The simple words, "Thank you for being kind. I'll be okay," hit her harder every time she looked at them. "You shouldn't have to be that brave," she whispered softly. Outside, the street was quiet except for the hum of a few passing cars. The lights from the diner reflected faintly off the glass windows, glowing like a warm beacon in the darkness. That's when the faint rumble returned, low and steady, growing louder by the second. The sound rolled through the town like distant thunder. Some of the customers turned their heads toward the window. Mary looked up, squinting through the glass. "Sounds like bikes," someone said. Another man added. "Probably just passing through." But the rumble didn't fade. It got closer. A moment later, 6 motorcycles came into view, their headlights cutting through the evening haze. They weren't racing or making noise for show. They rode in calm formation, engines steady, their presence commanding attention without even trying. When they stopped outside the diner, all 6 engines shut off almost at once, leaving a brief silence that felt strange after the roar. The doorbell jingled as the first biker stepped inside. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a calm face and kind eyes that looked around the diner, scanning every corner without saying a word. The others followed behind him, each wearing worn leather jackets with patches on the back that said Iron Wings Brotherhood. They didn't look angry or wild, more like people who had seen a lot and learned how to carry it quietly. The chatter in the diner stopped instantly. Everyone just watched as the group found a booth in the corner. The leader took off his gloves, placed them neatly on the table, and nodded politely to Mary when she came over. "What can I get you, fellas?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Coffee," the leader said, his voice deep but gentle. "All around, please." "Sure thing." She poured 6 cups without asking questions, though curiosity burned in her eyes. When she returned with the coffee, he looked up and asked softly, "There was a girl here earlier today, wasn't there? Young, kind of quiet, wears braces on her legs." Mary froze for a second. "Yes," she said carefully. "She's a regular." He nodded slowly. "She all right?" She was upset," Mary admitted. "Some boys came in, gave her a hard time. I tried to stop them, but..." She stopped herself, looking down. "They left before I could do anything more." The man didn't speak right away. He just took a slow sip of his coffee, eyes steady on hers. "Did they touch her?" he asked quietly. Mary hesitated, then said, "One of them scared her, but she wasn't hurt. Not physically, anyway." He let out a long breath through his nose and nodded again, his jaw tightening. "That girl means something to us," he said. "We've known her for years. She comes by our community rides sometimes, helps hand out food at events. Sweetest soul you'll ever meet." Mary's eyes widened a little. "I didn't know that," he smiled faintly. "She doesn't tell people much about herself. Never wants to bother anyone." The other bikers sat quietly listening. None of them looked angry, just thoughtful, as if they were already planning something in silence. One of them finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You said those kids were locals?" Mary shook her head. "No, I've never seen them before. Looked like they were passing through." "Then maybe they'll be easy to find," the man replied simply. The leader looked at him and gave a small nod, but then turned back to Mary. "We're not here to cause trouble," he said. "We don't do that. But no one gets to treat that girl like that and walk away thinking it's fine." Mary nodded slowly. "I understand." He looked around the diner once more. "What did she do after they left?" "She cried a little," Mary said softly. "Then she thanked me and went home." That was it. For a few moments, the leader didn't speak. He just stared down at his coffee, tapping his finger on the rim of the cup. Finally, he said quietly, "We'll make this right." No one in the diner knew what he meant by that. Some of the customers exchanged uneasy glances, but none of them said a word. Something about the calm in his voice made them trust that whatever he planned, it wouldn't be reckless. The bikers finished their coffee in silence. When they stood up, the room seemed to shift slightly, not in fear, but in quiet respect. The leader left money on the table, more than enough to cover their drinks, and nodded to Mary again. "Thanks for the coffee," he said. "Any time," she replied softly. "And thank you." He gave a small smile. "Don't thank me yet." They walked outside, the door closing softly behind them. Through the window, the diners watched as the men climbed back onto their bikes. The engines started one by one, the rumble deep and steady, echoing off the empty street. Then they rode off together, disappearing into the dark stretch of road beyond the diner. Inside, the silence hung heavy again. One of the regulars spoke first. "You think they'll find those kids?" Mary looked out the window, still staring in the direction the bikers had gone. "If they say they will," she said quietly, "then they will." Later that night, after closing, Mary locked the diner door and walked to her car. The air was cool and the sky was scattered with stars. She paused for a moment before getting in, glancing once more down the road. The sound of those engines still echoed in her mind. For the first time that evening, she felt something other than guilt. She felt hope. Meanwhile, Lena sat in her small bedroom across town, her braces resting neatly by her bedside. Her mother had tried to comfort her earlier, but she'd told her everything was fine. Still, her eyes had stayed wet long after the lights were turned off. She hugged her stuffed bear tightly, whispering to herself that she wouldn't cry anymore. She didn't know that just a few miles away, people who cared deeply for her were already riding through the night. On the road, the 6 bikes moved as one. Their headlights lit the highway like a moving chain of stars. The wind carried the sound of their engines far across the quiet town. The leader kept his focus on the road ahead, but in his mind he saw Lena's face, that shy, soft smile she always gave when she volunteered with them. He remembered how she never asked for anything, never complained about her challenges. She just showed up and helped every time. "She deserves better than this," he muttered under his breath. The man riding beside him heard and nodded silently. They didn't need to speak much. They understood each other. Back at the diner, a few late-night travelers came in, unaware of the story that had unfolded earlier. The tables had been cleaned, the smell of fresh coffee filled the air again, and everything looked normal. But the people who had been there before still talked quietly among themselves. The story of the girl and the bikers had already started to spread. In a small town, news traveled fast, especially when it carried both guilt and hope. By midnight, the streets were empty, and the town seemed to sleep peacefully. But far down the road, the distant hum of motorcycles still echoed faintly in the wind, a promise that the story wasn't over yet. The morning light crept slowly over the quiet town, brushing against rooftops and glimmering on the windows of the diner. Inside, everything was back to its usual calm rhythm. The clatter of dishes, the smell of bacon on the grill, and the faint hum of the radio behind the counter. To anyone walking in, it would have looked like just another ordinary morning. But for the people who had been there the day before, the memory of what happened still sat heavy in their hearts. Mary moved behind the counter, pouring fresh coffee for the early customers. Every now and then, she glanced toward the corner booth, the one where Lena had sat. She'd already wiped it down twice, even though it was spotless. Something about that booth felt different now, as if it held a story that hadn't finished yet. A few regulars talked softly among themselves. They wondered if Lena would come back, and if the bikers from last night had actually found the boys who had mocked her. Nobody knew for sure. The only thing anyone could agree on was that the air felt strangely expectant, like the town itself was holding its breath. Around mid-morning, the bell above the door rang. Everyone turned to look, half expecting trouble, half hoping for closure. But it wasn't the bullies this time. It was the same group of bikers from last night. They walked in quietly, one after another, their boots thudding softly on the tiled floor. The leader took off his sunglasses, scanning the room. His face wasn't angry but serious in a calm way that made everyone pay attention without a word being spoken. He gave Mary a polite nod as he walked to the same booth they'd sat in before. Mary quickly grabbed the coffee pot and walked over. "Good morning," she said, trying to sound casual, though her voice trembled slightly. "You all want coffee again?" "Please," the leader said. "Thank you." As she poured, she couldn't help but ask, "Did you find them?" The leader looked up at her. His eyes were tired but steady. "We did," he said simply. The diner went silent again, as though the air had been sucked out of the room. Even the radio seemed quieter. He didn't rush to explain. He just stirred his coffee slowly, letting the steam rise between them. "We had a little talk with them," he continued. "Nothing rough. Just words. Sometimes that's all it takes." Mary nodded slowly, feeling both relief and curiosity. "Did they understand what they did?" The leader gave a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "They do now," he said. "We made sure of it." The others at the table stayed quiet, sipping their drinks. You could tell they weren't there to brag or show off. They were there because something had happened that mattered, not just to Lena but to all of them. One of the bikers, a man with a scar on his cheek and the gentlest eyes you could imagine, spoke softly. "She's a special girl, you know. We met her a couple years back at a charity ride. She helped hand out food to kids and didn't even take a break all day. We tried to give her money for helping, but she refused. Said kindness shouldn't cost anything." Mary smiled faintly. "That sounds like her," she said. The leader nodded. "When we heard what happened, we couldn't just let it go. Someone called me last night. Old friend from town. Said he saw something in that diner that didn't sit right with him. Turns out he was right." Mary thought back to the older man who'd been sitting by the window the day before. He'd left quietly after the boys were gone. "That must have been him," she said softly. The leader nodded again. "He told us exactly what happened. We rode in because we wanted to make sure she knew she wasn't alone." At that moment, the doorbell rang again. Every head turned. Lena stood at the entrance holding a small paper bag. Her mother had dropped her off for lunch, not knowing the bikers were there. She froze when she saw them sitting in the corner, her eyes widening slightly. She recognized them instantly. They'd been kind to her before, at events, fundraisers, and community rides. Mary quickly waved her over. "Hey there, sweetheart, come on in. Your favorite booth's ready." Lena smiled shyly, her braces clicking softly against the floor as she walked toward her spot. But when she saw the bikers watching her, she hesitated. The leader stood up slowly and gave her a gentle nod. "Hey, kid," he said, his voice warm. "Good to see you again." Lena's face softened into a small smile. "Hi," she said quietly. "I didn't know you were here." He pulled out a chair for her. "We just stopped by for coffee. Thought we'd say hello." She sat down, still looking a little unsure. "You didn't have to," she said softly. The man smiled. "Yeah, we did." The diner was so still that you could hear the sound of spoons stirring coffee from the other tables. Everyone pretended not to stare, but they all listened. The leader reached into his jacket pocket and placed something small on the table, a round patch with a pair of silver wings and the words, "Iron Wings Family." He slid it toward her. "This is for you," he said. "Means you're one of us now, family." Lena's eyes widened. I can't take that," she said. "Yes, you can," he replied. "You earned it. Not because of what happened yesterday, but because of who you are. You've always been brave, even when you didn't think anyone noticed." Her lips trembled slightly as she looked down at the patch resting on the table. The diner was silent except for the quiet hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. Mary's throat tightened as she watched the scene. She knew that no speech in the world could have meant more to that girl than those few simple words. Lena finally picked up the patch and smiled, though tears filled her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. The leader nodded. "Any time." One of the bikers leaned forward and said softly, "You don't ever let anyone make you feel small again, okay? You've got people who care about you. Don't forget that." Lena nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. The room felt warm again, like something broken was slowly being fixed right before everyone's eyes. Mary brought her a milkshake, setting it gently on the table. "On the house," she said. Lena smiled through her tears. "You always say that," Mary winked. "And I always mean it." The bikers stayed a while longer, chatting with Lena. They asked about her therapy, her hobbies, and her dream of studying art. She told them she liked painting sunsets because they make everything feel okay, even when the day wasn't. The leader listened carefully, nodding. "That's beautiful," he said. "You keep painting, all right? The world needs more people like you." By the time they left, the diner didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt alive again. As they walked out, the other customers clapped quietly, not for drama, but out of genuine respect. They'd seen something real. When the door closed behind them, Lena sat quietly, looking at the patch again. She traced the stitching with her fingers, smiling to herself. For the first time since yesterday, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. Protected. Mary leaned on the counter, watching her. "You okay, sweetheart?" Lena nodded. "Better than okay," she said softly. "I didn't think anyone cared that much." "Oh, honey," Mary said, smiling warmly. "More people care than you think. Sometimes they just don't know how to show it." Outside, the roar of engines started again, fading slowly into the distance as the bikers rode off down the road. But their presence lingered, not just in sound, but in spirit. Everyone in that diner felt it. Something about that morning had changed the town just a little bit. That night, when Lena got home, she pinned the patch on her backpack. Her mother asked where it came from, and Lena just smiled. "From my friends," she said softly. "They came back." She sat by her window for a long time, looking at the streetlights and listening to the faint echo of motorcycles somewhere far away. The world felt safer now. Not perfect, but safer. And for the first time in a long while, she drifted off to sleep with a real smile. Meanwhile, the bikers rode through the open roads under the setting sun. The leader looked over at his friend and said quietly, "Maybe the world's not as bad as it feels sometimes." His friend chuckled. "It's not. You just have to remind it every now and then." The leader smiled and kept his eyes on the road ahead. The engines hummed like a promise that kindness still existed, and sometimes it came riding on two wheels. The next few days passed quietly in town. The diner had gone back to its regular pace, coffee cups clinking, plates sliding across the counter, and the same old music playing from the little jukebox near the door. Yet something had changed in the air. The people who came in didn't talk about the weather or work like before. They talked about what had happened, though no one mentioned names. Everyone had seen kindness in a way they hadn't expected. The story of the bikers spread faster than anyone imagined. Some said they had taught the bullies a lesson in words that would never be forgotten. Others said the bikers had simply looked them in the eye and made them realize how small their actions had been. No one knew for sure, but everyone agreed on one thing. Since that day, those boys hadn't been seen around town again. Lena hadn't gone back to the diner yet that week, but she was doing better. The patch the bikers had given her now sat proudly on her backpack. Every morning when she looked at it, she felt a quiet strength inside her, a reminder that she wasn't alone. She still moved carefully with her braces, but there was something new in the way she held her head now. Confidence. That Friday afternoon, Mary was refilling coffee at the counter when she saw a familiar face through the window. It was Lena, walking slowly up the sidewalk with her backpack on and a small box in her hands. Mary felt her heart lift instantly. She hurried to the door, pushed it open, and smiled wide. "Look who's here," she said cheerfully. Lena smiled back. "I brought something," she said, holding up the box. Mary tilted her head. "Oh, what's this?" "Cookies," Lena said proudly. "I baked them myself. I wanted to thank everyone for being nice." Mary's eyes softened. "That's the sweetest thing I've heard all week. Come on in." The regulars turned as she entered, offering quiet smiles and waves. Everyone had come to care for her in their own way. Lena made her way to her booth, setting down the box carefully. Mary helped her sit and said, "You've got perfect timing, honey. You just missed the lunch rush." As they talked, the bell above the door rang again, and once more that familiar low rumble of engines echoed from outside. The sound made everyone pause, but this time it wasn't fear that filled the room. It was something else. Warmth. The door opened and the 6 bikers stepped in. They looked almost the same as before, leather jackets, calm expressions. But today there was something lighter about them. They were smiling. The leader spotted Lena immediately and grinned. "Well, look at that. We came at the right time." Lena's face lit up. "You came back," she said, her voice full of excitement. "Of course we did," the leader replied. "We couldn't let you start your weekend without saying hi." Everyone in the diner seemed to relax instantly. Mary came out from behind the counter with more coffee mugs, already knowing what they'd ask for. "Coffee for all of you?" she asked. "You know us too well," one of them said, laughing. As the bikers settled in, Lena opened the box of cookies and said shyly, "I made these for you too." The leader looked genuinely surprised. "You made these?" She nodded proudly. "They might not be perfect, but I tried my best." He picked one up, took a bite, and smiled. "They're perfect," he said. "You've got a talent, kid." The others agreed, complimenting her baking, making her blush with happiness. The whole diner watched the scene like something out of a movie, real, gentle, and full of heart. After a while, the conversation grew deeper. The leader leaned back in his seat and said, "You know, when we left last time, we didn't just want to make things right for you. We wanted to remind people that standing up for others isn't hard. It just takes one person to start." Lena listened quietly, nodding. "Sometimes I wish I could be that brave," she said. He smiled kindly. "You already are. You kept your head up when others would have broken down. That takes courage. Mary chimed in from the counter. He's right, sweetheart. You didn't let what happened define you. That's strength. The leader looked around the diner, then back at Lena. We talked to those boys again, you know. Not in a bad way, and just enough to make them understand. They didn't realize how deep their words could cut. Sometimes people act tough because they're scared themselves. Lena thought for a moment and said softly, I don't hate them. I just wish they'd been kind. That made everyone fall silent for a moment. The leader smiled faintly. That's exactly why we wanted to see you again, he said. You've got a good heart. Don't ever lose that. After a few more minutes, the bikers started chatting with other customers. People who had once been too shy to speak to them now came over, shaking their hands and thanking them. It was as if the whole town had decided that day to let kindness spread a little further. A man from the back, who had been there during the bullying incident, walked over with his coffee mug. I didn't do anything that day, he said to the leader quietly. I should have said something. I didn't, and it's been eating me up since. The leader looked him straight in the eyes and said, You're doing something now. That's what matters, the man nodded, visibly emotional. Thank you, he said before returning to his seat. Mary wiped her eyes discreetly, pretending to fix the napkin holder. The whole diner felt lighter now, not just because of the bikers, but because people had found a bit of courage again. An hour passed before the group got ready to leave. The leader turned to Lena and said, We're organizing a charity ride next month for kids' hospitals. We'd love for you to be there. You can hand out cookies again. Lena's face lit up instantly. Really, I'd love that. Good, he said, smiling. It wouldn't be the same without you. Before they walked out, the leader took something from his pocket, a small keychain shaped like a silver wing. He handed it to her gently. Keep this with you. It's a reminder that no matter where you go, someone's got your back. Lena took it carefully, holding it tight in her hand. I'll never lose it, she said. The bikers walked out into the sunlight, their jackets glinting slightly as they climbed onto their bikes. Lena watched from the window, her smile wide and bright. As they started their engines, the leader turned back one last time, gave her a thumbs up and said, Stay strong. Kid. When they rode off, the roar of the engines filled the air again, but this time it sounded like hope. People in the diner watched until they disappeared down the road, leaving behind a sense of peace that lingered long after the sound faded. Mary walked over to Lena's booth and said softly, You've got quite the friends, don't you? Lena nodded, still staring out the window. Yeah, she said. They make the world feel a little safer. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Lena sat at her desk at home. The silver wing keychain lay beside her notebook. She opened it and began to write, not about what happened in the diner, but about how it made her feel. She wrote about fear, about kindness, and about the way people could change when they were reminded of their humanity. Her mother peeked into the room. What are you writing? Lena smiled without looking up. Just something I want to remember, she said. Her mother walked in and hugged her gently. I'm proud of you, Lena smiled wider. I'm proud too, not just of me and of them, all of them. That night, as the stars began to fill the sky, the distant sound of motorcycles echoed faintly again, softer this time, almost like a lullaby. Lena looked out her window holding the silver keychain and whispered, Thank you. The town slept peacefully that night. The diner's neon sign flickered in the distance, glowing red and white against the dark. Inside, the corner booth by the window waited, clean, quiet, and full of stories. Stories of courage, of kindness, and of a girl who learned that even in moments of pain, there are always people willing to stand beside you. And somewhere far down the highway, the bikers rode on, not searching for trouble, but carrying the quiet satisfaction that comes from doing what's right. For them, that was enough. And for Lena, it had changed everything. A week later, the diner was busier than usual. The morning sun poured through the big windows, filling the place with golden light. The smell of pancakes and coffee drifted through the air, and the sound of laughter made the space feel alive again. It was as if the whole town had found its heart after what happened. Mary stood behind the counter, flipping through her order pad, when she saw a familiar figure step through the door. It was Lena, her backpack hanging loosely on one shoulder and that silver wing keychain shining in the light. She looked stronger now, not just in the way she moved, but in the calm confidence on her face. Mary smiled wide. "Well, good morning, sunshine," she said. "You're becoming a regular again." Lena laughed softly. "I missed your pancakes." "Of course you did," Mary teased. "Sit wherever you like. Your booth's waiting." Lena slid into her favorite seat near the window, the same one where everything had started. She ran her hand over the table, remembering that awful day, and then smiled, thinking of how much had changed since then. The fear that once lived in her chest had turned into something else. Quiet courage. As she waited for her food, she looked outside. The street was calm, but in the distance she spotted something that made her grin. A few motorcycles parked near the corner store. Her heart skipped happily. The bikers were in town again. When they entered a few minutes later, the whole diner seemed to light up. The familiar sound of boots on the floor, the easy laughter, the nods of respect. Everyone greeted them now, not with fear, but with warmth. They were no longer just bikers. They were part of the town's story. The leader spotted Lena instantly and smiled. "Look who's here before us again," he said with a chuckle. Lena smiled back. "You said you'd be here for breakfast one day." "And we keep our word," he replied as he and the others sat down nearby. Mary came around with coffee for everyone, shaking her head playfully. "I should start putting your names on a plaque," she said. "Better make room for her name too," one of the bikers said, nodding toward Lena. "She's one of us now." That made Lena blush. "I'm not tough enough for that," she said shyly. The leader leaned back and said, "Being tough isn't about muscles or bikes. It's about kindness when it's hardest to give." Mary added softly, "And she's got plenty of that." Everyone laughed gently, and for a moment the diner felt like one big family. After breakfast, the leader pulled out a small flyer from his jacket pocket and handed it to Lena. "Remember that charity ride we told you about?" he said. She nodded eagerly. "Well, it's happening this weekend. We want you there. You don't have to ride, just be part of it. We'll be stopping at the children's hospital, handing out gifts and cookies. It's all about spreading kindness." Lena's eyes lit up. "Can I bring my mom too?" "Of course," he said warmly. "Bring anyone who wants to help." When the bikers left that morning, they told her where to meet them on Saturday. As the engines faded into the distance, Lena felt something flutter in her chest, excitement mixed with a quiet sense of belonging. That Saturday came quickly. The morning air was cool and full of the sound of engines revving in rhythm. Dozens of bikers had gathered near the town's edge, lined up in rows like a sea of chrome and leather. They weren't scary. They were smiling, laughing, helping kids put on helmets and taking photos with families. Lena arrived with her mom, carrying 2 boxes of homemade cookies. She wore her favorite jacket with the small patch the bikers had given her, stitched carefully on the sleeve. When she saw the leader, she waved shyly. He waved back, walking over with a grin. "You made it." "I wouldn't miss it," she said. "I brought cookies too." "You just made everyone's day," he said, patting her shoulder. "Come on, let's introduce you around." He took her to meet some of the other riders, people from nearby towns, all coming together for the same cause. Each one greeted her kindly, calling her the brave one or the girl from the diner. She smiled at each of them, realizing her story had somehow become something bigger than just one bad day. When the engine started, the leader crouched beside her. "You'll ride in the support van with the families," he said. "You'll see everything." Lena nodded, her heart racing with excitement. As the bikes rolled at every stop, the bikers handed out small gifts, stuffed animals, books, and snacks. Lena helped hand out cookies, her face glowing with pride each time a child smiled at her. The bikers kept an eye on her, making sure she didn't get too tired, but she never complained. She was having the best day of her life. By the time they reached the hospital, the sun was starting to set. The bikers parked outside in a neat line, the chrome catching the last light of day. They carried their donations inside, toys, blankets, even a few handmade cards. Lena walked beside the leader as they entered the children's wing. The hospital staff greeted them warmly, and the children's faces lit up as they saw the group walk in. One little boy, sitting in a wheelchair, stared in awe at the leather jackets and helmets. Lena knelt beside him and offered a cookie. "These are homemade," she said gently. He smiled wide. "They smell so good. Did you make them?" She nodded. "With help from friends." He looked up at her braces and then back at her face. You're cool, he said simply. Lena laughed softly. You're pretty cool yourself. The leader watched the exchange quietly, his expression soft. He turned to one of his friends and said, That's what it's all about. For the next hour, the group handed out gifts and cookies, told stories, and even revved a bike outside so the kids could hear it. The hospital lobby was filled with laughter and warmth. Even the doctors and nurses were smiling. Before leaving, the leader gathered everyone outside. Let's take one big photo, he said. Lena stood in the center, holding her box of cookies, surrounded by the bikers and hospital staff. When the picture was taken, someone said, That one's going on the diner wall. As the ride ended and the sun dipped below the horizon, Lena sat quietly on a bench watching the sky turn orange and pink. The leader walked over and sat beside her. You did good today, he said softly. Lena smiled. So did you, he chuckled. Nah, you're the real hero here. You turned something painful into something beautiful. She looked down, her voice small but sure. I just wanted to do something that mattered. And you did, he said. You reminded us that kindness doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be real. After a few minutes, her mom came over, thanking the bikers for everything they'd done. The leader nodded and said, She's got a bright future ahead. Don't ever let anyone dim that light. As they parted ways, Lena gave him one last cookie from her box. For the road, she said with a grin. He laughed. The best kind of fuel, he said, taking it with a smile. The engines started once again, their deep sound rolling across the open fields. Lena stood beside her mom, waving until they disappeared down the road. That night when she got home, she placed the day's photo on her desk, her in the middle, surrounded by her new friends. She looked at the picture for a long time before whispering, Thank you, to no one in particular. Weeks later, the photo found its place on the diner's wall, right beside the counter. People would stop and look at it while waiting for their food, and Mary would tell the story. Not about the slap or the bullies, but about what came after. About kindness. About people who chose to stand up instead of turning away. Lena kept visiting the diner, always greeted by familiar smiles and friendly nods. Sometimes she'd hear the distant sound of motorcycles in the distance and feel that same warmth in her heart. She'd glance at the silver wing keychain and know she wasn't alone anymore. The world, she had learned, could be cruel sometimes. But it could also surprise you with goodness when you least expected it, and that was what she wanted everyone to remember. Because in one small diner on an ordinary afternoon, a moment of cruelty had sparked a chain of kindness that would never be forgotten. And for Lena, that was the day she realized that even in her quiet, gentle way, she had the power to change the world. One kind act at a time.